evening and welcome. I'm Alice Pernick, Vice President for Debates for the Larchmont-Mamaroneck League of Women Voters. The League is a nonpartisan organization and does not support any particular candidates. Our mission is to inform and educate the public and encourage voters to exercise their right to vote. We're here tonight to hear from the 4 candidates who are running for the school board, and there are 3 positions open on the school board. Tonight's forum will be a conversation moderated by Alice Bloom, a longtime League member and past president. She's also the host of an LMC-TV show called A Town and Village 2. I'd like to thank LMC-TV, the candidates, and Alice Bloom for appearing here tonight, as well as the League members who helped organize this event in a short time frame. The school board elections will be held on Tuesday, May 15th. Registered voters can vote at your local elementary school. Polls will be open from 7 a.m. until 9 p.m. Remember that on May 15th, voters also will be deciding whether to support the district's proposed budget and capital improvement bond. To hear the views of Superintendent Schaps on those measures, look for the League's recent issue breakfast on the LMC-TV website, which is lmc-tv.org. And now I will turn the evening over to Alice Bloom.
Thank you, Alice. It's pretty unusual to have 2 Alices at the same place at the same time, but I appreciate being here, and it is my pleasure. I'm pleased to be here to facilitate a conversation with the 4 candidates for election to the Mamaroneck School Board. This is a conversation, not a debate, and we will try to let everybody get a shot at every issue. We'll be talking about the candidates' experience, their views of how effective school board members work with each other, the school superintendent, and the community to keep the quality of education high, the infrastructure of our educational plant in good working order, as well as dealing with a myriad of issues, from unfunded mandates to contract negotiations to tax caps, all while holding the reins on spending. This isn't a formal debate, and I'll not have a timekeeper, but in the hour allotted to us, I will do my best to see that each candidate gets to weigh in on every question and issue. As I said earlier, there are 4 candidates for 3 seats on the Board of Ed, which makes this a contested election. The candidates are Robin Nishinsky, an incumbent running for her 3rd term. Melanie Gray, Roger Martin, and Victor Gotti are all making a bid for a 1st term. Robin, Melanie, and Roger are running with school board selection endorsement. Victor is running as an independent. The School Board Selection Committee actively seeks qualified candidates to run for and to serve the community as members of the school board. It may, but has not here or in the past, endorsed more candidates than the number of open slots. The vote for the Mamaroneck School budget, bond, and board members will take place on Tuesday, May 15th, as Alice told you, at our local elementary schools. First, allow me to tell you about the candidates. First, incumbent Robin Nishinsky. Robin is a practicing attorney. She has a law degree from Benjamin Cardoza Law School and a master's in guidance and counseling from the College of New Rochelle. She was chair of the Mamaroneck Larchmont Human Rights Commission, co-president of Central School PTA, and a PTA vice president at both the Homics and MHS. Robin co-founded Central School's core conflict resolution program. She and her husband have lived in the district for 24 years. Their 3 daughters attended the Mamaroneck schools. In her first 2 terms, Robin was involved in a national search for a new superintendent and in collective bargaining negotiations. She serves on the district's finance and communications committees and is a board liaison to Chatsworth Elementary School and the Mamaroneck Schools Foundation. Victor Gotti is a partner in the accounting firm KPMG, LLP, International Corporate Services Practice. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Connecticut, a J.D. magna cum laude from Western New England College School of Law, and an LLM Master of Tax from NYU. He and his wife moved to Larchmont from New York City in 2008. Their daughters are kindergartners at Murray Avenue. This year, he's been a volunteer with the district's Citizens Financial Advisory Committee, working on forecasting the budget for the next 5 years. Melanie Gray and her husband have lived in Larchmont for 21 years. Their 2 sons attended Central School, the Homics, and MHS. Their youngest is a senior at MHS. Melanie received her BS from the University of North Carolina and her JD from St. John's University School of Law. Currently, she's a part-time associate attorney for Colazzo, Florentino, and Kyle in New York. Melanie is a past president of the Central and Homics PTAs, the MHS PTSA, as well as PT Council. She has written about everything from district budget negotiations to school awards ceremonies for the former online local newspaper, the Larchmont Gazette. Roger Martin and his wife have resided in Mamaroneck since 2008, when they returned to his family home. The Martins have 2 grown daughters. Roger attended Mamaroneck Avenue School and graduated from MHS. He holds a bachelor's degree from Drew and Yale and a doctor of philosophy from Oxford. He served as president of Moravian College from 1986 to 1997 and of Randolph-Macon College from 1997 to 2006. And he was associate dean of Harvard Divinity School. Roger is author of Racing Odysseus, A College President Becomes a College Freshman Again. Currently, Roger volunteers at MHS, helping seniors through the college admissions process. I am honored to be in your presence, all of you. Let's start with the first question. Now, this is something that you probably have given a great deal of thought to. What motivates you to run, and what skills do you bring from your personal and professional life that would make you an effective school board member? Robin, let's start with you.
Why am I running?
What makes you an effective school board member, and what skills do you have from your from your professional or personal life that are applicable on the school board?
Okay, well, I have been on the school board now for 6 years. I'm currently the president, and as you mentioned, I've been on pretty much every committee, I think, that we have in the school district, pretty much. I'm currently on the finance committee. I'm on the collective bargaining team. I am on the communications committee and the buildings committee. I have been on the audit committee, the fields committee, the law and policy
Well,
committee.
let me ask you, what skills have you learned from this experience that you find very important for service on the school board?
What skills have I developed? Well,
Or from your professional life?
I'm sorry?
Or from your professional life?
Well, from my professional life. Well, I am an attorney, and I guess I think of it more as, I have learned a tremendous amount about the school district in my 6 years. I have brought some of the skills with me. My skills as a lawyer, I think, have been very helpful in terms of analyzing legal issues. There's a piece of the job that the public doesn't see, which is the executive session work that we do, which has to do with contracts, which has to do with collective bargaining. And I think my lawyering skills, as well as my work in conflict resolution, actually has been very helpful in that regard, in learning to find common ground and working together with people. I think that my experience on the board is very valuable. In fact, in that I know and have a history of many aspects of the district, and I understand what the issues are, and I can come from a place of understanding and knowledge when I'm making decisions about things. It actually takes a while to develop that. In fact, one thing that's been unfortunate in the past several years is that in the time that I've been there, 6 years I've been there, 3 members had to step down after 1 term because of time commitment issues. Because of that, we're going to be having a relatively inexperienced board. If it's one of the factors in my deciding to run again, because out of 7 members, 2 are in their first year, and there are 3 openings. So if I were not in one of those 3 positions, we would have 5 out of 7 board members who were in their second or first
So
year.
you will be one of the senior members on the board.
I would be, and I believe in the value of bringing on new members, but I also think that there's a very big learning curve and complex issues, and that it's important to have balance, the
Thank you.
balance of experience and the fresh perspective.
Very good points. Thank you. Victor?
What motivates me to run sort of occurred a couple of years ago during the budget vote for 2010 in terms of
Roger, Victor, I'm going to ask you to move a little
Oh,
closer
sorry.
to the mic. Sorry.
It was 2010 really when I went to the budget meetings at Homics High School, Mamaroneck High School, and saw the dynamic in terms of the budget when you look out on a sort of 5 to 10 year period, and you realize that much of the issue really comes around the fact that there's the non-discretionary portion of the budget and the discretionary portion. And much of the discussion in terms of what we cut or don't cut really is about the discretionary portion. But it's the non-discretionary portion of the budget that really is driving much of the decisions that we're forced to make from year to year. And as a parent of kids who are sort of starting out in the school district, it's very important to me to make sure that we focus on trying to get a better balance between the discretionary and the non-discretionary.
So, Victor, what skills would you bring to help deal with that issue?
Skills? Well, I don't have probably as many of the other people here do in terms of having experience or skills in terms of the nonprofit or the educational sector. But in my profession, where I'm advising clients all the time in terms of saving taxes on a global basis, we're always forced with constraints on budget and making tough decisions in terms of what types of planning and reducing tax risk for the clients makes sense given constrained budgets. And there's also the sense of constituencies that have interest in various aspects of the planning. So there's always a bunch of negotiating and deciding what is the best course of action for clients. And I think that skill, identifying problems, how to solve those problems, and negotiating with people is something I've been doing for 20 years. And I think it's a portable skill. And I think having private sector experience makes a lot of difference in terms of identifying problems that aren't dissimilar. It's just the context is different. And identifying the right people and how to negotiate may be different for me. But it's been my experience that those discussions and those negotiations are not different. It's just a matter of context.
Thank you. Melanie?
I was motivated to run.
Melanie, I'm going to ask you to move a little closer
sorry.
to the mic. That's all right.
It's my long legs are a problem. I was motivated to run really because my kids have had extraordinary experiences in the school system. And I started volunteering. I did some PTA leadership things. I volunteered as a parent member on committees for special education. I've learned some things. I've been impressed. I think we can probably do some things better, but I think we have an extraordinary school district, and I think it's going to get harder to keep our excellent school system in the face of the tax cap and some of the other issues coming down the pike. I'm hoping that some of the things I've learned may be of value. I'm passionate about communication. In my PTA roles and as a volunteer for the Larchmont Gazette, I worked hard not only to inform myself but the community about what was going on, and I think that's crucially important as we come into these tougher financial times, that people understand why the schools are the way they are, what can be changed, what's reasonable, what's not. I am analytical and fair. Maybe I was born that way, maybe it comes from my legal training, maybe my husband and I like to play devil's advocate. For whatever reason, I like to think that I can objectively approach a problem and try to come up with some reasonable solutions. I guess that's pretty much it.
Very good. Thank you. Roger?
Thank you, Alice. I'm the only one here who's really been away from this community for many years, for my adult professional life. But the reason I'm running is I believe in service and giving back. And the Mamaroneck school system and the high school from which I graduated 50 years ago did so much for me in the formative period of my education. And I just want to give back to it, and I'm retired, so I've got the time now to be able to do that. I think what I bring to the table is I've been a college president for 20 years. Before that, I was a dean at Harvard dealing with budgetary and finance issues. But as a college president, all the issues that the board here in Mamaroneck has had to deal with are issues that we deal with in higher education. It's not just local, it's really national. And I've been dealing with almost all the things that are dealt with here. And I think what I can bring to the table is an insider's perspective. I mean, I know the school system, I graduated from the high school, but what I can bring to the board is my almost 40 years experience in higher education, especially the 20 years I was dealing with very, very difficult budget finance issues, but I also know education.
Okay, and you think those issues on a higher level, on a college level, are applicable to a public school?
Yes, I think in this country we are education across the board, K-12 through college and university, are very similar problems with maybe a little bit different details, but we are a nation that continues to have a great educational system, and we need to make sure that we do, because this is the future of America. So doing something, giving back to education is something I hope I can do on the board if I'm elected.
Great. Thank you very much. You've touched on lots of issues which we'll explore in greater depth. Victor, we're going to start with you with the next question. Constituent groups often form to pursue issues they are passionate about, and you've touched on that, I think, in your comments before. For example, Fields for Kids. How do you think school board members should respond or react to these kinds of groups?
It's a difficult question because each group has a perceived idea or sort of self-interest, which is undoubtedly important to them and certainly probably important to the community. But I think one of the difficult things being on the board is you have to juggle the various special interests that they all have. And one of the difficulties that has been mentioned is that as the budget becomes more inflexible, you have to make judgment calls between which interests are more important than others. And maybe even saying important isn't the right word. It's just you have to decide, given budget constraints, which interests are more critical sometimes than others. And it's a difficult decision. I don't think anybody likes to make those decisions. I think in a perfect world, we'd like to accommodate every interest because we all recognize the benefit that each group brings to the community. I just think the difficulty, like I said, one of the issues is that over the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to encounter more and more having to make decisions amongst those special interests. And I think that unless we can take care of the non-discretionary portion of the budget, we are likely to be facing continually, which group has to have their interests curtailed more than others. And I'm not sure we want to make those choices, but the board's called on to make those. And I think that it's a sobering thing for all of us to make this decision to run, is decide that we're going to be in a position of having to make decisions that aren't necessarily popular to people, because we may have to choose one interest over another, but that's the job of the board. I think hopefully over time we can build flexibility into the budget where those conflicts become less and less. But I mean, it's a difficult thing. I don't know that in the next 5, 10 years you can avoid those things, but I think it's a definite problem that all of us, I think it's very courageous for all of us to want to run, because I think the next 5 to 10 years definitely are going to be that period where those conflicts become more apparent.
Thank you. Okay, Melanie, how would you deal with this very difficult situation?
Well, I think one of the hardest things about being on the board is trying to understand what your community wants. And certainly constituent groups are very vocal, and we are blessed in this community with a lot of very active people who've done a lot of wonderful things. The challenge is sometimes there's a silent majority out there, and they're very silent. And so, I've been attending board meetings, I think, for 10 years or so. I've seen disagreements about Kemper, the Kemper Memorial being moved. I've seen the Fields for Kids and let's have a turf field. This year it was the busing, and are we going to outsource? Are we going to bus private school students? There are a variety of issues that come up. Every year there's something, it seems. And one of the things that I think is crucial is that the board provide an opportunity for all to be heard. And I've certainly watched through the years. I feel, as an observer, that the board has done a particularly good job in more recent times at creating an opportunity for a minority in the room, with somebody with a view that may not be a popular view, to stand up at a school board meeting and speak. This might mean no applause, and that's hard when there's a lot of supporters there, but I think that's something the board has done very well in the last several terms. And again, I think it's the real challenge. We want to be responsive to all of our community. Obviously, as Victor says, everybody can't be happy, but we at least would like to be making decisions based on well thought out rationale and an understanding of what our constituents
So you
would
think
like.
you would be strong enough to say no even to a group that had some compelling
Well,
arguments?
I
Okay.
think that's your job.
Okay. Roger, how would you handle it?
I think listening is very, very important in my experience. I think for a new member like myself, I think in the very beginning, it's important to listen to the constituency, listen to the various people who have concerns. Then I think keep focused on what's important in education, keep focused on our children. This is what it's all about. Keep focused on the teachers who teach our children. And then, like everybody has said, and together with the board, make difficult decisions. This is not a popularity contest. This is a time when we make difficult decisions, but keeping in mind what our goal is, and that's to provide the best education we can for our children.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, Robin, now you've actually been on the firing line here.
Well, I agree with everyone. We've definitely had to make some very tough decisions this year. Particularly has been difficult, and it's only going to get more difficult. There's no question about it. When I first got on the board, the district had just won the Kemper case in court, and we were at a very, very bad place. And one of the, in terms of our relationship, I think, with the community, the
It was a
school
very divisive
district.
issue, yes.
One of the things I am most proud of is the work that the board has done in communications. When I first got on the board, there was a communications committee. I was assigned to it, and it didn't even meet. We have come just, a whole other world away from that place. But and so communication is a very big piece. The listening is a very big piece. I think that I often find that when people feel very strongly or have a complaint about something, even if I don't agree with what they have to say, there's still a kernel in there that I can learn from. And I also very much believe that everything doesn't have to be black and white, or very rarely so. Even though you have to make a decision that might not be what someone wants, you might be able, in listening to what is concerning the person or the group, work something out so that you can give them, or you can make it a more comfortable decision for them. And that often helps. And I think that people feel good when they feel respected. And one of the things about Fields for Kids is a wonderful public-private partnership. And that in itself was something new and different in our community. And with the transportation, it's unfortunate we had to do that. We needed to save the money, but we worked it out that the bus drivers can be employed by the new company, and we're trying to address the concerns
You've
of
preempted
parents.
me on that one. Let me just get to it. I think you have answered the question, and I thank you very much. The district is expecting to save more than $800,000 by outsourcing its school busing service, although it eliminated 37 positions, as you've just alluded to, and they've switched to the Ardsley Bus Company. Do you see other ways to tighten up expenditures without compromising the quality of education? And I'm going to ask Melanie to start first on that.
I think that the superintendent and the board have done a very good job this year at finding several. I assume you're talking about something other than what is in the current budget?
I leave it to you to tell me right, we're not talking necessarily about this budget, but going forward, what other opportunities are there to
I would hope if there was
tighten up?
something really obvious, it would have been done. And I think that they, having sat through the day-long, line-by-line review, that I accept that the superintendent and board did look very carefully. I think we're going to have to continue to look and be creative. Part of that is going to depend on our teacher's contract. We need a little more flexibility in terms of scheduling, perhaps, to be able to deliver education in a different way. That's the phrase, and you think, deliver education, what does that mean? I think it means in secondary schools that they may look, particularly at the high school level, a little different than an elementary classroom where you have a teacher at the front of the room and kids
But
sitting.
how specifically would you be able to tighten up costs? What discretion would you have to do something like the creative solution of outsourcing busing? Do you know of any? Certainly an incumbent has a little bit more advantage here. You may have been more intimately involved, but
I think there's always a trade-off when you outsource things. I think the outsourcing of the busing was as difficult as it was with the employees. It was going with a vendor that the district already had a relationship with, so it wasn't an entire transition. You're not at liberty to outsource things. There are union contracts that prevent you from outsourcing existing jobs.
Lots of challenges. That's what I'm asking for you. If you
so
know of any other ways that we could tighten things
I
up.
promise if I did, I would have emailed Bob and Robin and the rest of the board. So, no, I don't have a
Okay.
great idea.
Thank you. Roger?
I think probably the only good thing about tight budgets and financial crisis, if you want to call it that, is it really forces us to think outside the box, to think creatively about how we can deliver education more effectively and more efficiently. And I think this is good. I think that, I can't speak specifically to, because I've not been on the board, but in my time as a college president, in the private sector, you're always under budget pressures because you're not getting monies from the state. Now public universities have to think outside the box because they're not either. So I think it forces us to do this. My concern really is you can think creatively and all of that, and I think we got a couple more, 2 or 3 more years where we can continue to look at ways of making cuts. But I think nationally we're getting to the point where we're starting to now make cuts at the core. And I'm very concerned about that, and I don't think that there can be any relief from that unless there is much more involvement from the federal government and from the states. And we could talk about that also. We can continue making cuts, and we will. We can be creative about them. We can even have a plus in all of this and being able to run more efficiently and effectively, but we can't continue doing it forever. I think technology will continue to play a big part here, but frankly, I don't think technology is a silver bullet to resolve all of our problems.
Thank you, Roger. Robin, now you of course have been involved in these negotiations, and the board came up with this solution of outsourcing busing. Do you see other opportunities to pursue non-educational cutting?
We can never run out of opportunities. We did find $2 million worth of efficiencies this year, and prior to this year, we have laid off 56, I shouldn't say laid off, through attrition. We've eliminated 56 positions in the last few years, but we are constantly looking for efficiencies, and I think we'll continue to find it. I think the comments about Albany and trying to lobby for changes in legislation are really important. As everyone knows, we now are operating under this new tax cap, while at the same time our state aid is falling. The unfunded mandates continue to come in. Pension costs are soaring. So that's something that we do and will continue to push on. But we can't just look at that. We have to take care of things while that work is hopefully going on. Collective bargaining is obviously a big piece of that. We are currently in mediation with our teachers. We've been negotiating for a year. We are holding firm. We feel we need to have a slowdown in the salary schedule. We need to have changes in health benefits, and we need, very importantly, to change things regarding time. We need to have the flexibility to work with our schedules, which we don't really have right now, so that we can change the way we deliver services, not in a bad way, to make services more efficient and deliver them in a better and more just cost-efficient way. So we are holding firm on that. We're also looking at things like, we're trying to think outside the box, online learning. We have a new architecture course this year for the first time, and that will continue next year, and there'll be another course. Technology, we've been centralizing services. We've consolidated our attendance and printing. And that has enabled us to have less employees who do that. We're restructuring our IT department, and we're bringing technology into the classroom so that we can teach in a more efficient way. Facilities use is an area that we have been looking at and will continue to look at to make sure that we actually, by law, we're not allowed to render services without extra pay. So, for example, if you're using our high school and we have to put 2 custodians to work that day, you have to pay for those custodians, and we have to, and then the question is whether we charge a fee for some of our services. We do that now with Memorial Field because we're trying to make sure we save for the turf. As I said, I can go on and on, but we're going to continue to look at our programs. We're looking at energy efficiency. with new heating systems in 2 of our schools. We managed to save $80,000 this year. We just started an energy performance contract to save money on energy. These are some of the things you would think were kind of non-discretionary. But I worked very hard to help bring the CFAC to life in this community.
CFAC is?
That's the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee, and Victor has joined it this year. It's a 2-year. It's been in the district now for 2 years, and they have helped us look at a use of our reserves. They put together a 5-year forecast. It's not necessarily a 5-year, but a forecasting tool where we can sort of plug in information and see how it will play out over the next several years. So those are all very good. These are all things that.
This is a good time to turn it over to Victor since he's on that committee. Thank you, Robin. Those were a lot of very specific. Robert, now Victor, this has
all
been
night.
you could, and with lots of good points. Victor, this is your issue. This is the issue you have talked a great deal about.
It
What
is.
specific issues, specific areas do you think could be adjusted?
I think one of the things that we found in working through this is that the board has done a really good job of identifying ways to save on what I call discretionary costs. When you talk about outsourcing, when you talk about identifying other areas for revenue in terms of user fees, I don't know that going out into the future there's a lot of opportunity to replicate that success, because I think they've identified most of the what we call low-hanging fruit. I think most of it, and what Robin's talking about, is that when you talk about collective bargaining, unfunded mandates, those are what I call the non-discretionary portion. That's where we've had less success because we aren't able to unilaterally affect those costs. It requires a lot of different skills. It requires a lot of negotiation. It requires the input of the teachers union, the state and local government. So I think a lot of where the future savings have to come from are going to be from the non-discretionary portion, because I don't think there's a lot of home runs left in the discretionary piece. And I think one of the difficulties is that the choice becomes whether we affect the non-discretionary portion, or whether we accede to increasing tax costs, because there really isn't much of a flexibility between the two. If we choose to maintain the service levels that we as a community want to provide to our kids, we then have to either cut non-discretionary costs or agree to probably tax increases above the tax cap. I mean, the tool that the CFAC put together suggests that those are decisions that might have to get made out into the future in terms of whether or not we agree to budgets that exceed the tax cap. Not to say that it's going to be a guaranteed eventuality, but those are among the choices that confront the community.
Now, when you talk about cutting non-discretionary spending, though we're talking about the unfunded mandates, the things you're required to do, and we'll get to that in a little while. I do want to address that. I mean, how do you exempt yourself from non-discretionary spending?
Well,
You don't have to answer that yet. I want you to think about that. Let's change the subject a little bit. Rating teachers and testing students are recurrent themes in education these days. Basically, we're looking for ways to evaluate the accomplishments of students and of holding teachers accountable for seeing that students achieve. How should results of student tests be used, and what do you feel is the correct way to hold teachers accountable for providing a quality education? Roger, let's start with you.
Boy, my oldest daughter is a bilingual teacher union member in the New York City public school system. So this is something that we talk about a whole lot. And it's also a big issue. Evaluation is a big issue, of course, in colleges and universities. I think that most reasonable teachers would say that they should be evaluated. I think that most teachers who come into our system are very capable and professional and do the job well. We could talk about tenure here. Maybe that wouldn't be very productive because it's a very, very controversial issue, especially in higher education. But I think that teachers have to be evaluated. I've got problems with just doing it by tests. That maybe should be part of the equation. The kind of evaluation we do a lot of in private higher education is really master teachers visiting the classroom. I imagine that's done in the Mamaroneck system by the superintendent and by the principals, and watching how teachers teach. But we have to remember with the score, the test scores and all of those things, teachers sometimes are teaching students who need extra help. And it's not fair to teachers who are teaching students who are the brightest and the best up here who are getting great scores, and then those teachers who are teaching really students who need a lot more attention. So there's got to be an equitable way to do evaluation. My preference as a teacher myself is, as a senior teacher, is to watch, to see how they work in the classroom.
And how about the use of student tests? The results of student tests?
I think student tests have to be part of the equation, but I think maybe a smaller part than just watching. And I'm absolutely opposed to the idea that we take those tests and we make the evaluation of teachers public, because that's going to discourage people from wanting to ever go into teaching. It would be the only profession I'm aware of that would do that kind of thing, just make public the results of these things. I think that needs to be done internally by the superintendent and by the principals, observing. But tests need to be part of the equation.
Okay. Thank you, Roger. Okay, Robin.
Well, I agree with Roger that I think teachers expect to be held accountable, and I think that teachers in our district are really professionals, and they work very hard, and we're very fortunate to have them here. We have a new APPR, Annual Professional Performance Review.
Thank you.
And that's the tool that's used to evaluate teachers, and actually under state law that has to be revised as of, I believe it's January 1st of next year, or we lose a lot of money, state money. So we're working on that right now, and one of the new things about it is this element of testing as part of the evaluation of the teachers. So we're actually, it's actually part of collective bargaining, where you are discussing what kind of tests or what kind of student evaluative measures will be considered. I think 20% is of the rating is based upon the statewide tests. Generally, our kids do pretty well in that, but obviously that would depend on the classes. And then the other 20% is going to be negotiated. It's tough for teachers to come under that microscope. I would prefer just to have a tenure system that is more reasonable, more time to look at teachers before they're granted tenure, and then because a teacher comes in the district and 3 years goes like that, and if they're previously tenured, it's 2 years. So there's very little time to really make an assessment of the teacher. And then along the way, perhaps every 5 or 7 years, if you could reevaluate that teacher, I would prefer
your
that to
preference?
some strict test-based method. But one system, and we've actually put a new evaluation system in this year, where instead of evaluating the teachers going into the classrooms, because that's how it's done, the superintendent, the assistant superintendents assistant principals go in the classrooms. They used to go in on announced visits 2 or 3 times a year.
Announced or unannounced?
Announced.
Announced.
And as you can imagine, that's really not the best way. So we have now instituted a system where they go in multiple times. They still have the announced ones, but they also go in multiple times unannounced for short visits. And in that way, you can give feedback in the moment. You don't necessarily
The
write
teacher
a
hasn't
report.
prepared a special lesson. You get a truer picture. Okay, let's let Victor get in on this. Victor?
I think one of the difficulties about evaluation is that frequently the conversation is a function of deciding what's the perfect evaluation system. And I think when you work in the private sector, people are evaluated on a consistent basis, and whether or not the system's perfect isn't really up for question. It's a matter of what benefits the private firm the most. And I think that there's 2 extremes. There's the pure testing sense, and there's the pure sort of evaluation where someone's in your class every day watching what you do. I think that there's probably there's sort of a good middle in the sense of how do you evaluate the best, a teacher's overall contribution to their students' learning. I think testing has to be a piece of it, just because it's one of the only objective ways to do it. But I don't think that testing in and of itself is the right methodology, because you end up with, as I think was said earlier, you end up with teaching to the test, which isn't necessarily the right way to teach students. It's a good way to hit the metrics. But I think that there is a balance. My personal preference is that you give greater flexibility to the superintendent. I think the superintendent has a better sense of who contributes overall to the learning of the students. It helps ameliorate some of the issues with teachers who may have more difficult burdens because they may have more special needs kids, they may have more bilingual kids. I think that the evaluation has to give flexibility to the superintendent to make sure that the superintendent is comfortable with his teachers and make sure that, if we've identified or hired a superintendent, I think we've assumed that that person will make the right decision from a teacher's perspective. Let's give him the right tools, or her, the right tools to make the evaluation. Testing can be a component of it, and for the teachers it needs to be fair because it has to be objective. They have to understand what the components are. But I think we need to give some flexibility to the superintendent to make sure that there's not some rigid ideology in terms of, there's 4 parts to the test and 50% is testing, 50% is in class. I think each school district's different, each school's different. There needs to be some flexibility to allow for the student body, and some teaching skills might be better in one context or another.
Now you've hit on an interesting point, which is the superintendent, which we're going to get to in the next question. But let's let Melanie get in on this question.
I agree. Testing it's not only a hot issue, it's a hard issue. I do agree with Roger. I don't personally think that publishing test results furthers anything. You can't tell from those test results if I'm the teacher who said, give me the hard kids, I'll work with this child, or if I had the kids who are getting have parents who read to them every night and do enrichment activities. You have no way of knowing that when you're reading the New York Times. I agree, though, that we need to use testing. I think we've done some very interesting things in recent years in this district. We use testing. It's actually fascinating how they can take the data and sort of slice it and dice it to see that Mrs. Jones' class did a really good job on the questions involving estimation, but not so good on the tests that involved, the questions that involved number sets, or, so they're able to really look at it very carefully. And then how do we work with Mrs. Jones to help her get better at the things that she's not so good at? So I think that's fabulous, and I think it's appropriate that be a part of evaluating teachers. I think evaluation is not just, we need to think of it not in a punitive way, because I do think most of our teachers really are professionals. They want to do better, they want to get better, and they're open. The current testing climate, though, has made everybody very anxious because if I'm the teacher who teaches an AP course to seniors, and you're going to look at my test scores, and this is not an AP course advanced placement course that typically students would get credit for when they graduate and go off to college for whatever reason. What is the incentive for my seniors to do well? I might be the best teacher on the planet. I might work with them at lunch and after school. We actually have some teachers at our school who do that. But if you're going to look at this testing rubric and the data, and that's going to be a big piece, is that really giving you an accurate version of what I'm doing for my students?
Well, I think you've all expressed your frustration with the testing. I know I hear about that a great deal. Now, Victor brought up a very interesting point, and that was about the superintendent. Since hiring the superintendent and working closely with him or her in developing a budget and dealing with so many other matters is what a school board member does, how do you, or would you as a school board member, evaluate the job performance of a superintendent? Do you welcome an activist superintendent, a superintendent with his or her own set of priorities, or someone who maintains the status quo and adheres to the values of the Mamaroneck School District? Robin, why don't you start?
Well, I am proud of the fact that we did do a superintendent search. Dr. Shaps is in his second year as superintendent here, and we are very happy so far with his work. We really wanted to look for someone with vision. We wanted someone who would lead us into the future, who would re-examine what's here, maybe shake things up if necessary, but also be able to value what is good and right about our community. So we don't want to lose what's good, but we do want to be able to move ahead, and we want to be able to work together. So we want him to be a leader, but he's also part of our team. So I don't know if that answers your
Okay.
question.
Yes, I
but,
think you've addressed it.
But vision is a very big thing, and I think he really does have that. He has the ability. We've been doing a number of sort of restructuring of departments, and he's really able to go in there and look and see how things can work better. And he's got a wonderful vision for technology, I think, for the future of our schools.
And you would say that's a very collaborative relationship between the present school board and the superintendent.
Yes, absolutely. And that does not mean that we are not critical. And we do, actually, our evaluation procedure is coming up. We generally evaluate the superintendent twice a year, once mid-year orally, and at the end of the year, there's actually a formal written evaluation. We have an evaluative tool, kind of like the teachers have. And we have certain areas, and it's very specific, and we're pretty tough critics.
Okay.
But having said that, I think we still have a good relationship, and we look for his feedback as well on how he feels, we're all working together.
Okay, thank you. Victor, would you comment on the balance
Well,
between the school board?
I think Dr. Shaps actually is an ideal candidate in a lot of ways because I think
I'm going to ask you to move a little closer to the mic.
I think he's an ideal candidate in a lot of ways, or ideal superintendent, because you do want someone who's a leader, someone who's able to work day to day and make decisions on his own, but you also need someone who's responsive to the Board of Education, but also the community in general. And I think one of the things that he's probably done, and I don't have a long history in the town, but I think one of the things that you have to admire that he does is that he does reach out to the various stakeholders in the community. He was willing to have the Community Financial Advisory Committee. He was willing. He makes a real effort to go out and talk to the various interest groups. So, when you talk about vision, when you talk about someone who communicates, he does a lot of those things. And I think that he's probably a good model, or as good as a model as you're going to find in someone who has the right amount of leadership, willing to listen, and also at the same time is willing to make decisions because he has a lot of experience. So, it's hard to say that there's someone that might have a better complement of skills, and I think that going forward you'd want someone who has a lot of the same strengths that he does.
Okay, so we're not really asking for a referendum on
But
on this present superintendent, but basically how you as a school board member would work with the superintendent and the kinds of expectations you would have of him or her. Thank you, Victor. Melanie?
I think first and foremost, a superintendent needs to be an educational leader, and I agree that Bob has done a very good job of bringing educational vision. I've heard him say, and I can only imagine how difficult it must be to juggle thinking about what's the best way to teach our kids with, emails about why is there a snow day, or why wasn't there a snow day, or all this kind of, keeping the lights turned on and the roof not leaking. So there's that component, but certainly the most important part is the educational vision. I do think it's important for the board in evaluating to hear from the community, not just from all the community. And I don't know how you go about doing that, but how do you get the feedback from your principals, from your assistant principals, from your teachers, from your clerical workers, from your custodians, from parents, from the community at large, and how do you, what's a process for factoring that in? Because I think superintendents, like teachers, would like to do their jobs well, and we can all learn and do better. So how do you fairly get that kind of feedback and create a structure that people feel that they can give honest feedback?
So you would create a structure where people could talk to you as a school board member about how they perceive the superintendent?
In some fashion. I know sometimes it's done through an independent consultant, sometimes it's done with school boards directly, but yes, I do think that it's appropriate, and I don't think this is something that needs to be done twice a year or necessarily even once a year, but certainly every couple years or maybe every year. I think there has to be a structure.
My takeaway from this is that you want the input of the community as well.
Absolutely, and by the community I mean not just the voters, the parents, the community at large, but the people in the schools who are in a position perhaps to understand more what this testing rubric does or doesn't, how it does impact their teaching. So yes.
Okay, Roger.
Well, having been a college president for 20 years, I imagine being a superintendent is a very, very difficult job. So many different constituencies, so many issues you've got to be juggling at the same time. And what's really critical from my perspective is the relationship between the board of education and the superintendent. And those school districts where the board and the superintendent work well together, not being uncritical, what Robin just said, but work well together, are going to be successful ones. One thing I might add here is I believe, maybe I'm prejudiced because I went through this system, I think that the Mamaroneck school system is like a national model. And I'd like to see the superintendent, I mean, you've got so many other things to do, also in the future become more involved around national educational issues. Because I think we can show a lot of school districts how well it can be done. And
You're
I
talking
think-
about while he or she is the superintendent?
Yes.
Be doing this
Yes,
during
I
his
think because
her
I
tenure?
think my own feeling is we're dealing with a national problem here. It's not just local. These are issues that are impacting all of education, and we need more people, more superintendents to speak out nationally and also in the state about these issues. And I'm impressed with this man. I think he has the ability to do that. Whether he has the time to do that, I don't know yet.
Thank you very much. You know, it's as if you folks are in my head because you preempted my next question. New York State and Mamaroneck are in the process of revising curriculum to align with a national core curriculum. Are there unique aspects of Mamaroneck schools that you think are in conflict with this approach? And if so, what do you think the district should do to preserve them? For example, are there alternate ways to offer courses, perhaps outside of the current budget? I think, Victor, we're ready to start with you.
Sure. I'm not one that's in favor of nationalizing a school curriculum. I don't think that there's a role for the federal government necessarily to play in that space, because I think that the local governments are best suited to deciding what's best for their kids.
But I think, if I'm correct, I think the local schools have to comply with this kind of
No, well,
alignment.
they do. I don't favor that. I don't think federalizing a national school policy or curriculum makes a lot of sense. I think that the community is best served by having the flexibility to decide their own curriculum. I don't disagree that there might be a state level or even regional basis for deciding what the right curriculum is.
But given the reality that Mamaroneck is going to have to do something to comply, how should Mamaroneck proceed?
Well, I mean, that goes to the budget. I mean, it's straight to the budget, which is you don't have the flexibility to offer sort of what you might call elective courses or other things if you want to maintain some sort of special character in the school in terms of curriculum, if we're confronted with the fact that the budget is going to be entirely used up by facing a core curriculum imposed on us on a federal level. So in an ideal situation, I would love the ability for us to have the ability to craft a curriculum that adheres to whatever national standard gets imposed, and at the same time preserve our flexibility to decide what curriculum we'd like. For example, you know, where my kids go at Murray, they don't have education in foreign languages until you hit Homics, I believe. And you know, in a perfect world, I'm not sure that makes sense, but budget realities supervene all those issues.
Okay, Melanie.
I think there's actually some good news about Common Core. What I am hearing from teachers and from our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction is that the Common Core standards are pretty good, that they are sort of codifying a lot of the things that A, teachers think should be taught, and B, that our district has been working really hard to develop anyway. So we have done a great deal of work with literacy design team and with our math coaches in the elementary level and the secondary level. Our department chairs have been working very hard, and you know, I'm kind of a school board nerd. I go to these meetings. I like the curriculum part, and there's been a lot of really rich discussion over the last couple years, and this seems to be what a lot of the Common Core standards are looking for. We've got it already. I think the challenge moving forward is not developing them. We've got a lot of them already. I think it's providing professional development to make sure that they're in all of the levels, that you know the work is across a second grade level, for example, in all the schools. I don't think, fortunately, that it's going to require us to lose our wonderfully rich electives and APs in the secondary level. I agree with Victor. It would be great to have foreign languages in the elementary schools. I don't see that happening anytime soon for budgetary reasons. But again, I think the good news about Common Core is that they're pretty close to what we have already and what we've been working to
You don't
develop.
think there'd be much disruption here?
I don't think disruption, but I think we spend a fair amount of time developing curriculum, and over the years, our budget for professional development has been trimmed. We didn't trim it this year, which I think is a very good thing. It's all about excellent teaching, whether you're talking about diversity in terms of socioeconomic, talking about special education. It's all about excellent teaching. If you don't have the excellent teachers, it doesn't matter what your curriculum is, it doesn't matter what your lesson plan is. And I think the professional development is really the key to all of it.
Okay, Roger, you have a shot at this one.
I think we're missing something here too, and that is there seems to me, I'm writing a book about the transition from high school into college, and there's not a whole lot of conversation between the curriculum at the high school level and the curriculum in universities and colleges. There's a disconnect sometimes. So in addition to all of what's going on here, there seems to me there needs to be some kind of dialogue between what universities are looking for, and in our system, we have a very high percentage of students who will go on to college and university, but there is very little conversation between what is happening at the university level and what's happening at the high schools. For instance, active learning is big now in universities and colleges.
Active
Right.
meaning hands-on learning?
I mean, not lecturing, not talking heads, but getting students involved in the classroom. Labs are an example of what we've been doing for many years, both in high school and college. But no more sage on the stage, no more professors just lecturing and students compliantly taking notes, but students really engaged. And yet, and I'm not against APs, we got the AP system in our high school system, which really encourages teachers to teach to the test. And what I saw at some of the colleges I was visiting were, for freshmen, first-year students, the faculty saying, don't blow off first-year biology or blow off first-year physics because we don't believe that the APs really are the same. Well, maybe that's true or not true, but there needs to be, as we develop curriculum, seems to me, some kind of communication between higher education and secondary education.
Good point. Robin?
When I first heard about the Common Core, I also felt like, oh, what is this new thing that's being imposed on us? And I actually went online and took a look at it, and it was so detailed. And I thought, oh, what kind of creativity is going to be left for the teacher? Every day they got to cover this, that, or the other thing. But a couple of weeks ago, we did our annual board visits, and we go in the classrooms and we look and see what the teachers are doing. And a lot of what we were looking at this year related to the Common Core because they have started implementing it in the classrooms. And Melanie is right. And it's not actually that it's because we're already doing it. It is new. A lot of it is new. But the teachers seem to really like it because it, instead of covering a lot of subjects in a more superficial way, it delves into lesser subjects in a much deeper way. And they love the way it targets, and they love the way, they like the detail. And so it seems like the teachers think it's actually, the Common Core standards are good. So
Okay,
therefore, I feel comfortable, and I have to really applaud our coaches. We do most of our professional development with coaches. Instead of taking teachers out and sending them places and getting substitutes and incurring a lot of money, we've gone for the model where we have certain coaches, literacy coaches, and we have a fantastic math coach who have spent the time and looked at the Common Core standards and developed, in conjunction with teachers, curriculum maps so that the teachers can actually get lesson plans and use those plans in their teaching.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, this will not cause much disruption in our district, and you don't think
Cause
that...
some disruption. There's a lot of new learning. There'll be some teachers who will probably have a harder time than others adjusting to it, but overall, what I'm hearing is that they're actually very well-developed standards.
Thank you.
So that's the good news.
It is very hard to believe, but we are almost at the end of our time. In the 1 minute we have left, I'm going to ask each of you one question, which you must answer with 1 or 2 words. What is your ultimate educational priority for the Mamaroneck School District? I'll give you a minute to think. If I had a little clock, we'd have a little music. Melanie?
Excellent schools.
Okay,
Excellent affordable schools. Sorry.
thank you. Roger?
Priorities are children. That's what it's all about.
Thank you. Robin?
Handling the financial challenges while keeping the education excellent and reaching the whole child, which is our goal.
Thank you. Victor?
To be unfortunately repetitive, children first.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here tonight and for your thoughtful responses to the many questions. I wish you all luck on May 15th, the date of the election, and my hope is that while only 3 of you will be elevated to the board, I hope that whoever is not elected will remain involved and perhaps make another bid at another time. We can't afford to lose you. Thank you. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, please vote on May 15th, and we'll see you next time. I'm Alice Bloom.